My name is Jean Yarbrough, and I am Gary M. Pendy Senior Professor of Social Sciences and Professor of Government at Bowdoin College in Maine, which is the northernmost New England state. And I got interested in Tocqueville because I teach political philosophy. And I have spent most of my life teaching or specializing in American political thought. And some years ago, I decided that I wanted to write a series of essays, which is now going to be a book, on Tocqueville's encounter, either real or imagined, with several of our most illustrious presidents. So for me, as for many of the students in the audience, Tocqueville is a bridge between my country and France, and we can have very, I think, profitable conversations about what Tocqueville has to say and how Americans have thought about Tocqueville. So that's how I got interested in him.
It's fascinating. Do you mind if we jump straight into some questions?
Not at all.
All right, cool. And guys, those of you who are here live, go ahead and message them in the chat if you'd like to ask yourself for Professor Yarbrough. One of the students emailed me, how does studying political thought help students better understand themselves and their role in society today?
Well, I think political philosophy in general, it takes a much deeper approach to questions of human nature, how to live. It raises the biggest questions. What's most important in life? What is a hierarchy of my principles or my values? What do I admire most? And I think you can help better discover yourselves and maybe even up your game somewhat once you read the great political philosophers, because they are far more interesting and deeper than, your self-help books or more ordinary sources of assistance to which you might turn to understand yourself.
So one of the kids, they want to know, how does, when researching figures like Thomas Jefferson and Alexis de Tocqueville, what qualities do you look for that reveal their character or worldview about that time?
Well, I take a number of topics that, in the case of Jefferson and Tocqueville, which I have written on, I look at what Tocqueville has to say about the effect of democracy on how people live. And I think this is one of the great themes of democracy in America. When Tocqueville writes about democracy in America, the central fact, his point of departure from which he begins, is that in America, there is equality of condition. And what he means by that is not what, say, Thomas Jefferson meant when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, or for your French students, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Tocqueville is not talking about an imaginary or theoretical state of nature. He's actually looking at the facts on the ground. And the fact on the ground in America, which is different from anywhere else, is number one, Americans never had an aristocracy. Aristocracy, in the sense of the old regime, means that you are born into a certain class. You inherit that class, and it's very difficult, especially if you're at the top, you're going to stay at the top. And in America, no one is born at the top. There are equality of conditions. That doesn't mean that everyone gets the same amount of everything when they start out in life. It means there are no artificial barriers to their rising. Artificial barriers. Of course, there are natural barriers. Some people are smarter. Some people choose professions or occupations for which they are well suited. Other people decide they want, for instance, to be a ballerina when they're really an elephant on skates. It's not going to lead them to success. So what Tocqueville sees is this equality of condition. And then he goes on and sort of spins that out. How does that affect how we are? And in the case of Jefferson, he talks a lot about the tendency of people who grow up under inequality of conditions to generalize their thoughts. He has a very interesting chapter on democratic historians. If you read a democratic historian, you will see that they will talk about abstract ideas, generalizations. For instance, generalization is a generalization, but democratization, globalization, financialization, commercialization, all of these Asians in there. These are general terms because in a democracy where there is an equality of condition, most people have to work in order to rise ahead in this world, and they don't have time to devote themselves to the fine points of history. And so they need catchphrases, they need general ideas to organize themselves. And another tendency of the democratic mind is to try to carry these ideas to their extreme. That if you say men are equal, and of course, by men, I mean all human beings. If you say that they are equal, does that mean that children are the equal of parents? And so you have some families, quote, democratic families, that allow children to decide whether or not they will get vaccinated or whether they want to eat their vegetables or do their homework. So you can see how a tendency to take ideas to their extreme, he says, is also part of the democratic mind. And and Jefferson does that in a famous letter where he says we should basically every generation start all over again in society. So he doesn't take the idea of consent. He doesn't stop at a sensible point, but says, well, every generation should refound their political society anew. That will keep them involved in it and interested in it. So that's one way in which Tocqueville helped me better to see some of the fault lines in a democratic society. On the whole, I think what Tocqueville does is emphasize both the strengths and the minuses of equality of conditions. And one of the minuses is just the effect on the mind. Another effect of democracy is the effect on the family and on all our relations with other people, which are so much more informal now. And I remember when I was a student, there were questions about hierarchy, and there was one school in New York where the professor solved that problem by saying, we won't sit at a table, we'll all sit cross-legged under the table so we can all be equal. So you see the way in which in democracies, you have a tendency to spin these ideas out into their really crazy extremes. And I find that to be very fascinating. Another aspect of equality of conditions that Tocqueville talks about is that we all find ourselves in an equal condition, but that means we don't have natural authorities to look up to. We're all equal. So who do we trust? Who do we rely on for our information to find out whether something is good or bad? And this leads to the importance of public opinion. Public opinion is paramount in democracy. But the problem, again, every time Tocqueville helps us to see something, he points out that there are downsides to it. And one downside is that it's very difficult to go against reigning public opinion. And he actually makes an observation about America that there is no freedom of thought in America because everyone is so much a captive of public opinion. Um, he also talks about family relations in democracy. In aristocracy, they are much more formal, and he says they're colder. You know, the eldest son is going to inherit everything, and the other children are going to have to scramble for their futures. But in democracy, everyone can inherit equally, and relations are less formal and they are sweeter, he says. So those are some of the ways in which he describes the transformation, which is still ongoing, toward less and less formality, more and more informality. We just had the Secretary of Transportation in the United States advising travelers not to wear their pajamas when they travel, that they should somehow try to look like adults and be well clothed when they get on an airplane. So you can see how over the years, everything becomes more and more informal. And that's a key element of democratic society. Now, if each person is equal but feels very weak and uncertain, one of the things that Tocqueville emphasizes, which has been so important to understanding America, is what he calls the art of association. That is, that I may feel very weak by myself, but if I find 5 other people who have the same views I do, we can form an association. Think of it with the clubs that students form in school. And now I always give these madcap examples. You are a feminist, vegetarian, socialist, but there is not such a group on your campus. So you form that because the art of association is one way of overcoming the sense of weakness that each of us feels individually in a democracy. And what absolutely floored Tocqueville when he came to the United States was to see just how intensely Americans made use of this art of association, that he saw the multiple uses to which it could be put. Of course, there were the local units of self-government, the townships in New England. And in my town, we still annually have a public meeting in March every single year to discuss the budget and elect officers, etc. There's a lot of decentralization. And this is something that Tocqueville found so striking compared to France, where the entire society was much more centralized and all decisions were made in Paris. Whereas in the United States, one way in which democratic citizens felt themselves to be empowered was because they had these local associations through which they got involved locally, and they made all the decisions, and he simply could not praise that enough. So again, the federal pyramid, as it were, in the United States has a very broad bottom, and that is the citizens themselves organized in their local communities, not only for politics, but for civic and social and religious and all manner of interest outside of the strictly political.
Well, it's ironic that you talk about that. We have a question from Leopold. Leopold in Paris. Leopold, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. So, what major difference do you see between the American political system and the French political system, please?
Well, I think, as I just said, one of the differences that that is still so striking is the American capacity just to solve problems. They are they're independent, they're self-reliant, but they are very clever at finding ways to combine with other people to effect changes that they want, whether it's in politics or it's their local schools or it's having a street sign put up, a stop sign at the end of a busy intersection or a stop light or changing the laws. Americans just are an organizing society, and they are very quick to jump in and find other people to get things done. Tocqueville, in the second volume of Democracy in America, calls this an analog of aristocracy. That whereas in an aristocratic order, because aristocrats have so many people beneath them who owe them something, they can just say, this is what I want to do, and everyone snaps to it. But in a democracy, people don't. So you have to associate together with others to get things done. And Tocqueville over and over again calls attention to this. In the Constitutional Convention of 1848, Tocqueville was a representative. I'm using American terms here. But when they were writing the Constitution for the Second French Republic, he observed, the French are willing to negotiate everything except centralization. They will never decentralize anything. So I think that is certainly one major difference between our two countries.
Well put. It's almost like you're an expert on this. I'm just kidding. Timothy, you have our next question. This is Timothy in Bordeaux, in France. Go ahead and ask.
What studies do you need to do to pursue the profession?
Would you say again, please?
He wanted to know, what studies do you need to pursue in order to go into your field?
You first of all, you go to college. And then when you get out of college, that's 4 years in the United States. And then you pursue a doctorate, a PhD. And that could be anywhere from, say, 6 years to the rest of your life. Some people make a lifetime occupation of that. And then after that, you get out and you start looking for a job. And you also, to teach at the college or university level, you have not only to be a teacher, but you have to be a scholar. So you have to publish, which means you have to have a facility to write well. You have to be able to speak well, and you have to be able to engage students, but you also have to do scholarly research and publish it. And so I would say those two things. You have to like young people and like being with young people. And then you also have to like being alone a lot, because I'm on sabbatical right now. There are days and days when I don't see anyone. I'm a widow, and I had to put my dog down in the spring. So there are days I don't even go out of the house. I'm just sitting here surrounded by books and papers and making outlines and writing and sitting at the computer. And that's part of what the life of a scholar and teacher is.
Well, we're so sorry about your loss, and we can't thank you enough for
I'm
it.
going to get another dog as soon as I finish this book.
There you go. But I know how important that companionship.
And I had a Brittany, by the way. It's French dog.
There you go. Irony. So one of the kids in Belgium messaged this to me. They can't unmute. They said, so due to your talk, you talked about Tocqueville admiring the American federal pyramid, where power rises from the township to the state and finally to the federal level, the national level. Do you think this from bottom to up like structure still functions as Tocqueville described, or has the pyramid essentially been inverted in a way with power now flowing mostly from the top down?
That is an excellent question, and I would have reserved that for the next time that I meet with students, where I'll talk about some of the problems of democracy. To a certain extent, what Tocqueville described in the 1830s and 40s was a highly decentralized administrative system. He thought that the American government that he came during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, who was famous for vetoing all sorts of federal legislation and returning powers to the states. He thought that America was too weak as a federal government, but that the administration of local matters was vibrant and very desirable. Throughout the 20th century, there has been, one could say, a kind of vacuuming effect where everything is sucked up from the local level to the state level to the federal level. And a lot of it has to do with the federal government's providing money for more and more activities, such as education and health and family services, and that when the government provides these funds, then they get to call the tune. And so the federal government and the state governments have assumed much more power over areas of life that were once called administrative, where the local communities would have much more freedom through their school boards to put together a plan of education for students living in that school district. So there's been a great deal of centralization. The rise of what we call the administrative state. And that's true in America as much as it is everywhere else. But we still have more of a sense that if you want to get something done, you organize. And parents, when they think that the federal bureaucracy has gone too far in claiming jurisdiction over matters that they regard as more properly the concern of parents and localities, do organize and try to redress that or reverse that. So yes, there's been a lot more centralization, but there are also a lot of vigorous arguments over how much power can be wrested from the federal government and returned to the states. You see this, for instance, with the current administration saying we want to return education to the states and to the communities. So there is a sort of counter revolution going on to try to decentralize some of the bureaucracy that is focused in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, to bring back to states' rights. Yeah, and we see that. So we'll go with a few more student questions, guys, and then let you go because we don't want to take up too much Professor Yarbrough's time. And I know it's getting kind of late for some of you guys in Eastern Europe. This is a question from Martina, and she is in Spain. Martina, go ahead and unmute to ask.
Hi, do you believe we will ever live in a totally equal society?
No. No, nor would Tocqueville want us to, because you have natural inequalities that exist. As I said before, there are people that the big thing for young people, and here's a little bit of advice, is for you to see what it is you're good at and to work very hard to do it. I will point out to you that Tocqueville wrote the first volume of Democracy in America. And when it came out, he was 25 years old. I always point that out to my students and say, okay, where are you going to be in 3 years? Will you have written something like this? Someone with Tocqueville's great intellect will obviously be more successful than someone whose intellect is more limited, or who chooses a profession that they like but that they're really not very good at, or they choose a profession that they like but they're not making as much money as people in other professions are making. So even when you remove all of the artificial barriers to social and economic mobility, there are still going to be natural barriers because some people are simply more gifted and also they have more luck. You know, sometimes people are just in the right place at the right time. They choose the right profession and they ride that all the way to the top. And in a different set of circumstances, it might not turn out that way.
So you'd say that we have a saying here in America about not everyone has the same amount of green lights in life. You're going to have more reds than greens, some of you. So we'll keep plugging along. We have Azure in Paris. Azure, go ahead and unmute to ask your question.
So hello, and
Hi.
Tocqueville emphasized like the role of religion in sustaining democracy. Why does he consider religion indispensable to like the American democratic experiment?
Your voice was a bit muted. Are you?
I got him. So he wanted to know about Alexis de Tocqueville's opinion regarding religion and it being crucial for American democracy. Why did he intertwine the two in his writing?
That was one of the things that he found so surprising when he came to America, that Americans were then and still are one of the most religious nations, especially in the developed world. And he found that really to be surprising. What he saw in France, not directly because he wasn't born during the French Revolution, but that because the Catholic Church sat in Parliament and was so intertwined with the old regime, when the old regime was overthrown, the church was overthrown too, and people became in France very hostile to religion. What he saw in America, though, is that religion and democracy went hand in hand. And there are several ways in which this operates. One is that religion sets certain boundaries to what you can do. I think what he had in mind was the reign of terror in France. If you look at the American Revolution, we didn't have a reign of terror. Religion prevents, he thought, certain of the worst qualities, the desire to kill, to torture, to just produce mayhem everywhere. Religion constrains that to a certain extent. The other thing that religion does is to focus you on all those things that are not tangible, that are immaterial, that give richness and depth to the human soul. He didn't want to see a democracy that spent all of its efforts solely on satisfying its bodily needs. I think one of the ways in which Tocqueville is the most interesting is that he thinks religion helps to strengthen the soul. And he thought of human beings as creatures that had both bodies and souls. And he thought that just arguing that we're matter in motion, the way some of the early modern philosophers had argued, was really to degrade and to devalue what it meant to be a human being. So
would you say that it was more of like more of keeping order, like politically?
No. Well, the first way, yes, that he says the idea that he says what religion prevents is the impious maxim that everything is permitted.
Sure.
There are limits to what you can't do.
Sure.
Over and above that, religion gives a space to those immaterial longings that we know we're going to die. What will that be like? Will there be an afterlife? How should I live? How should I nourish my soul? And religion is certainly not the only way that you can nourish your soul, but it's a very important way for most people. And so he thought that the American solution to the problem of politics or liberal society, the separation of church and state, that all of this made perfect sense. And it was superior to what the French had done when they basically turned against religion in the worst days of their revolution.
Sure. Okay, we'll go with one more student question. I have so many questions from these kids and guys. Thank you so much for bearing with me. Before I forget, we have another de Tocqueville series on December 15th at 6 p.m. Paris time. I hope that you guys register and join us then. So if you still haven't answered your questions, you guys can come with those questions for our next expert. This comes from Antony. Antony is in the Canary Islands. You have a very interesting question, my friend. You can be our final student question. Go ahead and ask.
Yes, thank you. Professor Yarbrough, do you think Tocqueville's idea that American democracy depends on civic habits and local association, does that still hold true today, or are those foundations weakening?
Well, always things change and are in flux. And I think that as we went through the great revolutions of the 1960s and 70s, the political revolutions, the coming of age of the baby boomers at the time, the sexual revolution, that there have been lots of changes that have affected the family and society as a whole. That Tocqueville would not have foreseen, but there is still a sense in America that people through organizing can effect political and social change. They don't, I think, feel completely helpless or without any power to change things. So in that sense, we still have a somewhat dynamic citizenry, though of course a lot of this depends on what students are learning in school, and that has changed too. And these are big debates that are going on across America today. What should we teach students? What should they learn? What do they need to learn to lead fulfilling lives? And I will tell you that with my own students teaching at one of the great colleges, which is a different thing from a university, we have no professional programs. We basically just study all the great books of Western society. Students find these questions about how to live and what gives meaning to life very important. And Tocqueville is right up there as one of the principal philosophers that they enjoy reading.
So it's timeless, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So my final question, this comes from me from Las Vegas, Nevada, where I live. So I asked this of all of our guests. What kind of advice would you have for these kids as they go off into the world and figure out what kind of paths that they want to leave, whether it is they want to study history or something completely different? As someone who's so accomplished in your field, what advice would you give for them?
Gee, that's a really great question. I remember when I was taking my younger son to college, and it was right after 9/11, and he was going to one of the very excellent universities in the United States. And he said to me as we were driving, "Mom, what will I major in college?" And I said, "I don't know. I think what you have to do is find something that you love, and you may not have had it yet in high school. It may be something very different from anything that you've done. But I would say find something that you love and try to love something that is sufficiently lucrative that you can support yourself." But I would say always study the big questions, enlarge your minds, enlarge your souls, because these books and these ideas are a great comfort, and they provide wonderful guidance throughout your entire life. I was just telling that to my oldest grandson, who is the age of the students I'm talking to today, and he's going to go off to college in the fall. And we were talking about what he might learn while he was there. And I said to him, after many years of teaching, these 4 years when you are in college or university, when you graduate, you will not be the same person you were when you entered, that you will have grown up more than you have grown so far in your life. So I would urge everyone to take great advantage of whatever educational opportunities come your way, to sort of stock up on all of the great ideas, because they will serve you very well in your life, even if not all of them serve to provide you with a source of income.
Wonderful. Well said. And Professor Yarbrough, we can't thank you enough for spending
Oh,
time with
so
us
much
today.
fun. It just flew by.
Yeah. And guys, if you want to register for any more events, check out edutainmentlearning.com. And we hope to see you for our next Tocqueville series. But before I let you go, Professor Yarbrough, before I end the meeting for all, I'm allowing everyone to unmute. Can we all say thank you to Professor Yarbrough for taking time with us today? Thank you so much.
You.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It was a great afternoon.